The content of this webinar will be a discussion on how public libraries can respond to the opioid crisis. And participants will obtain information on how the Michigan opioid antagonistic laws affect how libraries may obtain and administer drugs like Narcan. This webinar will discuss possible policies and strategies to help public libraries comply with current law and still assist patrons in need. So with that, I'm going to turn over the presentation to Clare Membiela, Library Law Specialist at the Library of Michigan. Clare?
Can everybody hear me? Hello? Okay, I'm going to assume everybody can. Oh, good. I see people popping up saying they can. Okay. So we're going to talk about Narcan and how public libraries could obtain it. What are some of the legal pitfalls? What is the law in Michigan saying right now? And just before we start, I want to mention that my job here at the Library of Michigan is not to tell you whether you should or should not do this, and to not tell you that you have to do this or you can't do it. My job is really to provide you with the information that will enable you and your board and your attorney to really come up with a good policy that works for you and your library. This issue in particular can be a very emotional issue. It's an issue that opinions could vary across different communities. There's a lot of information online right now. There is a little bit of blowback on this. There's an overwhelming majority of people that strongly believe this is something everybody should do. But that's really something that, depending on your staffing and depending on your community and depending on your board, you really have to make that decision for yourself. And it's not my job to tell you or to make you feel guilty or to enforce it on you. But I want to let you know what is available, what you can do, and what your options are. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So first, let's talk about what is Narcan. So Narcan is really the brand name of the drug naloxone. And what it is it's called an opioid inhibitor, and that's how many of the laws describe it. And if you do some searches on Google, you find out, and I have on the screen, the National Institute on Drug Abuse has a really good description. From a chemical standpoint, it binds to receptors in your body that link to opioids, that are attracted to opioids. And what it can do is it reverses the effects. In the way that I've heard it described is it kind of prevents the opioid effect on your body from hitting your body. And it, in a very quick time frame, can reverse the effects of opioid and an opioid overdose on somebody who's having an overdose situation. In a lot of ways, it's termed a miracle drug. It has very little side effects. We're going to get to that a little bit later. It is very safe to use. It is safe to use even on children. The effects on pregnant women are not fully known yet, but again, that's something we'll talk about later. There's a risk-benefit analysis here, but it's generally thought to be overwhelmingly safe and effective, and if you've ever seen it in use, it actually is pretty amazing as to how quickly the person can recover. So it's considered to be like a miracle drug, and it's also pretty inexpensive to obtain. So let's talk a little bit about how you administer Narcan. Generally, most states, you have two options. It's either via injection, like insulin, using a syringe, or a nasal spray. In Michigan, most of the pharmacies that are authorized to dispense Narcan are dispensing the nasal spray version. And if you've ever, either yourself or your child has ever gotten the nasal flu shot, where they just squirt it up their nose. It's fairly similar to that. So it comes in different kinds of bottles and different kinds of syringes, but essentially you just squirt it up the nose. So let's talk a little bit about why our library is talking about this. So now we know a little bit more about Narcan, but why is this such a big issue that we're talking about this today? Well, many of you probably have heard the opioid crisis. Just today, the president is going to be signing a document that is going to announce as an emergency, an opioid emergency, which allows additional funds to be released to states for programs to help prevent this kind of problem. It also is going to probably work or indicate or order certain pharmacy companies and doctors and how to dispense it and how to release it. But pertaining to our presentation right now, the opioids, the statistics right now are that it's killed, as you can see on the screen, at least 30,000 people in 2015. But one of the things that's very concerning is the way that the statistics are skyrocketing from year to year. So already in 2016, the numbers have already jumped from where they were in 2015. A very large study, well-regarded study just came out from the CDC, which is why you're seeing a lot of the statistics in the news and stuff right now. Just yesterday or the day before, this study was released with all of these numbers from 2015, and nearly half of all of these thousands of opioid deaths involve prescription opioids like fentanyl or the different morphine, different kinds of prescriptions you may get from your doctor after you Vicodin, after you get after you have surgery. So in fact, just today on NPR, if you look at the graphic on my slide where it says 91 Americans die every day, just this morning on NPR, they quoted 140 Americans dying every day. So already, statistics are, this is from 2016, and already it's jumping. And the reason why libraries are very concerned about this, because drug abuse has been around for a long time, and there's an awful lot of drugs that cause an awful lot of deaths. In the 80s and 90s it was crack, and now heroin because of the opioid crisis and all these opioids. But one of the things that is particularly concerning is this is a drug that runs across spectrums of demographics. It's not just the stereotypical inner city gang or inner city, the homeless person, or the kind of stereotypical person you would think would be, a drug addict, and you don't think of the stereotypical person with opioids. You're finding suburban families and suburban moms and suburban dads and grandmothers. The demographic skews from very young to actually over 60. So opioids and opioid prescription medications have flourished in the last 10 years, and they're widely prescribed, and they've been widely prescribed. And that's one of the issues that Congress and many state legislatures are looking at right now, is the ability for doctors to prescribe so much. And no one was really kind of monitoring how many of these pills were being given out. So that's kind of what's bringing us into this, libraries into this, and why there's so much concern is because it's really blowing up and because it's affecting a large demographic of people, including many of the people that generally use our libraries. Everyone from families to that homeless person, from teens to the 60-year-old. So it's starting to become very visible in our society. The overdoses are happening everywhere, and you may have read in June the ALA article that talked about Colorado and Pennsylvania as being two areas where Narcan's already in heavy use in libraries, including in Philadelphia, where libraries, anecdotally, librarians even run out of the library into public parks next door to rescue people. So it's becoming a very widely used tool by libraries to help their patrons. So let's talk a little bit about what Michigan's doing now that you have a little bit more information about the what's and the whys. So Michigan's we're fortunate in that Michigan is one of the 39 states that actually has opioid inhibitor laws. All 50 states have laws that govern some part of this crisis, whether it's the prescribing piece, whether it's the, you know, kind of intervention with addicts. But Michigan is one of the states that actually has passed laws to make it relatively easy to obtain Narcan and naloxone in order to help people. In Michigan, as you can see on the screen, almost 1,400 people died in 2016 from an opioid overdose, and that equals to just a little under 4 people a day. And if you look at the comparison from 2015 to 2016, it's almost double. So again, Michigan is following that huge spike from that the nation is in terms of deaths from opioids. So the crisis, that's why they're calling it a crisis. It's because it's growing by leaps and bounds every year, and it's getting incredibly concerning. If you look at the slide from 2012 to 2015, it doubled. From 2015 to 16, it almost doubled. And you know, nobody wants to see what's going to happen if it continues to double. 72% of all of drug overdose deaths in Michigan are because of opioid overdoses. And that's a pretty large, that's a pretty telling statistic, I think. So the opioid inhibitor laws in Michigan in 2016, what Michigan did, how different states are handling this different ways. So it's not even really useful to consult librarians in other states to see, you know, what they're allowed to do, because states are fairly widely varying in how you can obtain it and who can obtain it. In Michigan, the way Michigan decided to do it was they amended their Public Health Act under the occupational code and under pharmacy. So they went at it from the standpoint of how can this be dispensed? So how can pharmacists and who can pharmacists dispense Narcan to? So it's not really a matter of who can get it. It's a matter of who can the pharmacist give it to. And so what they did was, there's 2 different ways so far that they've done this. One way that they've decided that pharmacists can dispense it is to anybody who has a prescription from their doctor. So your doctor can issue a prescription for Narcan, and if you currently are experiencing a problem with opioids, that was probably the way to go. Also, if you're the family member of someone who's experiencing an opioid problem, you can get a prescription from that doctor or your doctor to help that person. So it's just like any other drug. You get a prescription, you take it to the pharmacy. The second way, which is the way that really has more meaning for us, is under a standing order issued by Michigan's chief medical officer. So the law authorized the chief medical officer to issue a standing order, which is kind of like a standing prescription. It's kind of like a general prescription for Narcan for everybody. And then the pharmacist can look to that as authority to issue prescriptions. So you don't have to take a piece of paper to the pharmacist. You just have to show up at one of the pharmacies that's eligible to dispense Narcan and say that you'd like to have Narcan to assist people in need. And that would give you the ability to get that as an individual. Now, part of this is that Michigan also issued a form that different pharmacies have to fill out to make them eligible to dispense it. So just not every single pharmacy can dispense it. You have to fill out a certain form online, the pharmacy does, and then the state issues permission, issues like, I guess, a certificate or something, and then they put your name in a list online that is, and there's also a map that tells you what pharmacies in your area currently have authority to dispense Narcan. And I have a link to that page on my presentation. And I believe after the presentation, I will send the presentation to Cheryl, and she'll make sure everybody gets a copy of it, because I have several links in here that can be useful for different things. So those are the 2 possible ways that someone can obtain Narcan. Now, there is kind of a twist here. On the screen here, I've put the actual text of the law. So under the Public Health Code, under pharmacy regulation, and it's Michigan Compiled Laws 333.17744B, it says that a person acting in good faith and with reasonable care, may possess and dispense an opioid antagonist, which is Narcan or naloxone. And it says a prescriber may issue a prescription for, and a dispensing prescriber or pharmacy may dispense an opioid antagonist to any of the following. So there's a whole list of them, but these are the ones that are pertinent to us. A family member, friend, or other individual in a position to assist an individual at risk, a school board, a person other than an individual that meets all the following requirements, and then among those requirements, it'll say a person that is acting in good faith and reasonable care. So when you look at this, you think, oh, okay, great, this is pretty easy. But then when you dig a little deeper, you think, okay, well, you know, the first thing that struck me here was, okay, who's an individual and who's a person? And they don't really define individual, but it's kind of clear from the statute that an individual would be a single person, or generally the way that it's written is it seems to be the person who's actually experiencing the opioid problem. But a person, when you go back and you look at the definition of person, the opioid statute defers to the definitions, the general definitions of the Public Health Code. And when you look at that, which is 3331106 at the bottom of the slide, it clearly says that a person means an individual, a partnership, a cooperative, an association, a private corporation, a personal representative, a receiver, trustee, assigner, or other legal entity. But person does not include a government entity unless specifically provided. Now that kind of really puts a giant shoe in the works for libraries, because libraries are government entities. Public libraries are government entities. And that is why schools are specifically mentioned. So when it says school board, that's a government entity that is specifically provided for in the statute. Same with police, fire, EMTs, all of them are specifically mentioned in different statutory sections that permits them to have the Narcan or permits them to obtain the Narcan or the naloxone in their own names. So the issue here, and so I want to just kind of make this really clear so everybody understands, individuals can go ahead and go to, Rite Aid is among the providers that are allowed to dispense it. So you could go to Rite Aid and you could go yourself and say, I'd like to get a Narcan kit, and they'll issue you one and you pay for it and it's no problem. But if you went to Rite Aid and you said, I'd like to get it for my library, and put it in the name of the library, so it comes to you, and just like any other prescription, it's in your name. If you want to get it in the name of your library, you can't do that right now because a library is a government entity, and so they are not covered under this particular statute. So individuals can get it, but the library in the library's name right now are not able to get it. Unlike, say, a school, where a school district, actually in the school code, there's a new section that pretty much says schools should get it or must get it. And it's put in the name of the school board, the actual drug. So the issue here is really liability. There are two different sections that prevent individuals or people who are dispensing or administering opioid antagonists from liability. There's one within the pharmacy code there, and there's one within the penal code, the criminal code. Both of these prevent anyone. So if you, as an individual, rescue someone using Narcan, you cannot be held civilly or criminally liable if anything goes wrong. It's kind of like the Good Samaritan Act. As long as you had good faith and reasonable care, which I'm sure all of us would. So if you mean well and you've been trained and you reasonably know what you're doing and you do the best you can, well, if you make a mistake and the person's not having an opioid overdose and maybe an epileptic fit or maybe low blood sugar and they pass out, but you honestly feel, you honestly think that they're having an opioid crisis, or something goes wrong with the dispensing, or maybe they're allergic and there was no way for you to know. There's no ramifications criminally or civilly that can happen to you if you administer this drug. The state really wants people to do this. So they're trying to make it as easy and as inviting as possible to get people to do this. So they've done their best to really make it as easy as possible and with no ramifications. The problem is, because libraries are government entities and they are not mentioned in the Act like schools and police and fire, they are not covered by these liability waivers or these liability prevention statutes. So that means that if theoretically now, because no one's ever brought suit, and as far as I know yet, so this is theoretically, that's kind of my job, is I research it, and theoretically it is possible that it's theoretically, the problem here is that if something goes wrong and in your library, while again, you have the best intentions, you are trained, you do the best you can, and for whatever reason something goes wrong and the person is injured or the person dies anyway, and someone decides to sue, well, they can't sue you, an individual, but they could, in theory, sue the library or try to sue the library if that's where this all occurred. Now, there are certain factors that could, if this all happens and you're using your personal kit and you're in the library and you try to rescue someone and that person either is injured or dies, and so someone sues, there's not a guarantee that if they did bring a suit against the library, it would even go anywhere, because there are certain criteria in a lawsuit that would have to be met in order for a suit to proceed. Well, there are certain factors that can make it more likely for something to go through than not go through, or for a suit, say, for lack of a better term, to stick. So some of those things might be things like if your library establishes formal policies for Narcan. So someone in the library obtains a kit individually and everybody, has it, or, the board or the director decides that everybody in the library should get their own kit or must get their own kit, and then the library has, a formal procedure that says everybody must use their own kit, or the library has formal procedures that says everybody must get training, we're going to train you. The more formal and the more official that the process is made, the more tightly it connects the institution of the library to your actions. And that's the thing that's going to make it more likely for a lawsuit to stick. Doesn't mean they'd win either. You can have a lawsuit and not, the person doesn't win. So, there's many factors here. But my job is to make sure that you have the information. And right now, in Michigan, the law is that libraries as government entities are not covered by these Good Samaritan laws that cover individuals or individual people that obtain the Narcan. And libraries as entities cannot obtain Narcan in the library's name. So what can we do? Well, the first thing I really recommend you do is consult your attorney, because every individual library has a different set of facts and a different situation that could either affect a liability for negative or for positive. So it's really important that you communicate with your attorney and your board to decide, okay, what is the best thing for us? Before you institute formal policies, before you institute any kind of formal training, to find out if the library could be implicated if they reimburse you for kits. If you want to encourage your staff to buy the kits, and the kits range anywhere, could be as $25 to $75. So depending on, if your staff member, if you want them to get a kit for the library for work and you want to be able to reimburse them, well, I would check with your attorney and make sure that that's not going to increase your liability. The same with offering formal training. If you are going to have a staff in service and you want to provide information and training, but it's not part of a you must know this, then I would say that's kind of on the line, but you're probably okay. It's when you get into the realm of you have to do this, or we must do this, or this is now an ironclad policy that the staff is going to do this. Every staff member has to know how to use it. Every staff member has to be prepared to use it. That's, I think, when you get into the realm of inching closer to a situation where the library could be more implicated in liability. But again, this is something that you really need to discuss with your attorney. Consult your insurer, because if you have a liability insurance policy, then check to see if this policy would cover a situation like this. Ask, say, look, under the current Narcan laws, the library is not covered under Good Samaritan, not covered under the waiver of liability. If a staff member in my library rescues somebody, to what extent could the library be on the hook? Are we more on the hook if we have a formal training? Or, and here's a very important question, if I buy a kit and I keep it at the reference desk, or I keep it in my desk drawer, and all of the staff know I have it, or 3 of the staff have a kit and some of the staff don't have a kit, and everyone knows that Betty has a kit and Betty has it in her drawer and Betty wants us to use it if we need it. Someone goes and gets Betty's kit, uses it, and there's a problem. Again, they are totally free of liability, but is the library implicated? And actually, is Betty implicated? So, there's in the realm of law, there's all kinds of scenarios, and I've been working with the law for almost 30 years in different scenarios, big law firms, law schools, with the general public, and I have learned never underestimate the general public's ability to sue. But that doesn't mean they'd win, and it doesn't mean that the case would even get past the filing stage. It's just depending on your individual situation, depending on the facts of the case, and all of these can be so individual. And that's why it's important for your institution that you sit and you talk to your attorney and you talk to your insurer to see what are the ramifications. And even if those ramifications are a little scary, that still might not mean you don't do it. It just means you need to be informed, and you need to understand what are your liabilities, what are the pros and the cons of instituting this program, at least for right now, the law sitting as it is. And that's where we come to weigh your risk. If you are in a community where the opioid crisis is in full bloom, and there are events occurring right in your local community that you know about, and versus this possible, maybe remote possibility of being sued, then that's, again, a risk-benefit calculation that you and your board need to make in consultation with your attorney. Because it may be that, right now, I haven't found any suits. And it's possible, you look at, okay, well, the high percentage of people that are administered this drug recover. And so you're saving a life. So if you're saving a life, what's the likelihood that person's going to sue you? And of all the lives that are saved, how many really die? And there's other factors. Did they die because of Narcan, or did they die because they were going to die anyway because they were in the middle of an OD situation? So again, it's one of those things that it really comes down to what's right for your community and what's right for your library. As I said before, this is a very emotionally charged issue. You may have staff that really, for whatever reason, don't want to do this. Don't feel comfortable. There could be religious reasons. There could be, different things going on. So, how far do you want to push your staff to do it if you have people who really don't want to do it, or don't feel comfortable doing, or don't feel like it's the right thing to do? And those are decisions that you have to make in accordance with your board. The other things to do as part of this is to understand or know who else in your community have these kits. Does your municipality, if you are in a building right next to your fire or police department or your town hall, does anybody there have kits? Does your police fire have kits? If you're a school library, you are already covered by that's the one exception. School public libraries, because they are part of the school system. In a school public library, their board is the school board. So in that situation, the school public libraries are covered by the school section. So they are covered under the liability. So that's one of the libraries that can do all of this, and there's no worry about liability. It's the straight public libraries that are concerning. But if you have a school right next to you or right down the street from you, who else has it? So, there may be situations where if you don't feel comfortable doing it, or you have staff that just don't want to do it or won't do it, then there may be other people close by who could help you out in a situation. Know, how quickly can responders get to you? Police, fire. Talk to your police and fire departments. What if your option is to call 911? How quickly can they get there? So there are other options if you personally or your location decides, look, we don't think we want to do this right now. If you do decide that you want to do it, again, your individual staff and yourself are protected. You can buy it yourself and use it, and there's no problem. And as I said, the farther that your institution is removed from the action, so again, no strict formal policies, no strict, mandatory training, no, all of that, the more likely it is that the library would not be involved in a lawsuit. The library would not, it's just no more than the public park or the mall or anywhere else that someone gets rescued. So, individually, go at it. You most certainly can get it. It's not a problem. Again, if your plan is to get a kit and let other people use it, I would double check with your attorney. There are no cases or legal information on that yet. It is a prescription. And it is a prescription made out to you. So to the extent that someone could get in trouble because they're using a prescription that's not that has not been prescribed to them, but again, there is that individual liability for that person who takes it. The issue might be you who left it. And my guess, and this is totally just my gut, it's not a legal opinion in any way, my guess would be that the risk-benefit analysis of saving a life versus getting in trouble for prescription is probably going to weigh on the side of saving a life. And probably my guess is that there probably isn't going to be as much of a problem in that scenario. But still, it's something that you would want to double check with your attorney, again, just to have all your bases covered, because that's your job as a director. So what else can you do? Well, educate your staff. Make sure, as a first step, make sure that, your staff understands what an opioid overdose looks like. Whether you decide to get an opioid kit or not, if you decide you're going to call 911, the sooner you act, the more likelihood you have that this person is going to survive. If you are a big library with bathrooms and you do have a population that might be part of the opioid crisis, have someone check the bathrooms frequently to see, is there anybody in there? Opioid overdoses can mimic other conditions. As I mentioned, they can mimic low blood sugar. It can mimic an epileptic fit. I mean, people, if you see anyone acting just very strangely, mostly like non-responsive, like they look like they're going to pass out, or they look like they're half awake, or they're having trouble, staying focused or keeping it together. A lot of times it's not like someone flailing about and yelling. It's someone who looks like they're just going to go to sleep. But it helps to understand what are those signs and how do they differ from some other things. And there's lots of websites that help you with that. Michigan itself has, on the screen here, has a link that's how to respond to naloxone and how to respond. And it's issued by the state, and it gives you nice instructions for not only how to recognize an overdose, but how to actually administer the Narcan. And also, when you get a kit, so when you go to the pharmacy and you decide to get a kit, the pharmacists are required to provide you with training. So they can provide you with a sheet with written information on exactly how this works. They should provide you with a demonstration, like a brief demonstration on how this, on what can happen. Some of the unexpected things that can happen are a person can go into cardiac arrest, a person can stop breathing, so you may have to perform CPR. A person can vomit pretty violently, so they say roll them onto their side. A person can awake in a very agitated state. I don't know if any of you have kids where they've had to have surgery or anything like that. Often with young children, when they're put under anesthesia and they're brought back out of it, they get extremely agitated. Well, this is kind of the same thing. A lot of times overdose victims come out of the Narcan in a very agitated state. Not necessarily violent, but very, agitated, not knowing where they are, not knowing what happened. So it helps if you understand that and you're prepared to deal with that. Because even if you have a first responder come and administer it, or let's say a security guard in your building, well, you're still going to be there and you might want to know what to do and what to expect. So one of the things you're going to want to do is talk to your staff about how your library is going to handle this. Are you going to encourage them to get individual kits and maybe provide them with some information on what to do and how to get it, but not require it? Are you going to encourage training? Again, as part of an in-service or something, you can have a training, an informal training, just like you would train for anything else that someone might help them to know. It's not part of you may already teach CPR or things like that. You may want to know which of your staff have kits, so that, because people can just go off and get them on their own and you might not even know it. You may want to ask for staff to volunteer who has a kit, just so that if there is an issue, you know who you can call on and you know who is willing and able to do it. And that can also be helpful. And all the rest of the staff know who is willing and able to do it and who has a kit. And again, investigate the option of sharing a kit, whether or not that's a thing. Again, with an institutional prescription, it is fine. Not sure whether or not it's okay under an individual prescription. Most likely, probably okay, but it's something that you would want to make sure you talk to your attorney about. I am not going to tell you that it's definitely okay because I'm not absolutely sure. So one of the things that we've been doing here at the Library of Michigan is, when we discovered this issue, we went to every agency of the state has a legislative liaison. And so one of the things that we can do is talk to our legislative liaison about legislation or about amendments or renewals or different kinds of things that would help our department. So one of the things we've already done is we went to our legislative liaison for the Department of Education and we said, hey, we noticed that you have schools are part of this, but libraries are not. And here's why that's a problem, and we would really like to have libraries added to the law so that we have the same coverage and the same protection as schools do, and we can go ahead and have it in the name of the libraries. And given all of the problems and all of the public libraries across the country that have been experiencing this, we'd really like this opportunity to save some lives. And so we have our legislative liaison who is talking to legislators about adding libraries as an amendment to a different law. We've also talked to MLA. I've talked to Gail Madziar, and they are going, and I've talked to somebody on the committee, the legislative committee at MLA, and they are going to bring it up in their legislative committee and hopefully also advocate for that. And Gail has told me, to keep in contact with her so that she knows what the Department of Ed is doing and so that they can kind of coordinate. So we're very hopeful that with both of those entities working for us, that this amendment will happen. And given that the fact that in the legislative history and in all of the information you can find for this law in Michigan is that it really is the intent of the state to get this in the hands of as many people as possible. So our feeling is most likely that the problem was just one of oversight. Libraries fell through the gap. So we are very confident that we think that we will have something in there that will enable all of this to be just much easier. So in sum here, make sure you talk to your board and attorney. understand what the law says, and again, I'll send out my presentation here so that you can see the law, and it has links to everything. What is your municipality's procedure? What are they doing? And that's particularly for PA 164 libraries, but it wouldn't hurt for a district library if there's a municipality that you work well with that you want to just ask, hey, what are you guys doing? See who else in your community carries Narcan as far as first responders or people within very close physical location to you. Get some education on what an opioid overdose looks like and how Narcan rescues work. There's also a ton of YouTube videos. I have links to a whole bunch of different very useful resources there that provide you with a lot of that information. So that's kind of the story. I hope that was useful for everybody. Because there is so many people online, I'm happy to take a few questions, but I'm also happy that to go ahead and respond to your questions separately. Cheryl will take note of all of the questions if you type them out, and then she'll send them to me, and I'll answer them individually since there's so many. But if there's anybody who has a question now, I'm happy to answer something.
Claire, I have a few questions that came in during your presentation.
Okay.
Let's see. So we have a question about how about county commissioners? Am I allowed to get it for my library? And that was Neil, and I'm not sure if you understand that question, then that's good.
He said, how about county commissioners?
Yes, am I allowed to get it for my library? And then he says, I do both.
Well, my understanding right now is that a government entity is a government entity, and so a county commission is also a government entity, so it's the same problem. He would not be able to get it in the name of the library any more than anyone else would, and if he could individually get it just like anyone else could.
Here's another question, Claire. If school districts appoint library board members, can those district boards convey authority to libraries?
That's a very interesting question, and I'm not sure. I'm probably I'd have to check on that. If a school district appoints a board member, I'm not sure, because even if a district library even if a school district could delegate the ability to obtain, like they could maybe delegate the liability waiver to that individual person. I'm not sure that they could. I can double check that, but I'm going to say I don't think so, but I will double check that to see. I'll go ahead and write that down and double check and see.
Great. And here's another question. Does this webinar count as proper training?
No, because this webinar provided some information, but you're going to want to get proper training on exactly how to administer that Narcan and exactly what an opioid overdose looks like. There's much more specific training on both of those things than what I discussed.
And here's another question, Claire. How much do the kits cost? I think you did cover that.
My understanding is that they're $25 to $75, but it could. I'm not sure if it could vary via pharmacy or what the kit contains.
Great. Denise is saying, please ask Claire to send out updates, including answers to questions to all libraries. Well, we already said we would do that.
Yep,
I will
certainly do that.
Actually, what will happen is this archive will be instantaneously available as soon as I get it posted, and that will happen this afternoon. So if Claire sends me her slides and we do a little Q&A document, we can probably get it all up and ready for you by tomorrow, and then Claire can keep updating the document for more Q&A.
Yep, okay.
Good. Actually, that's the end of the questions I have right now. Does anybody else have a question? That you can actually unmute yourself if you like, or you can type it in. There's a thank you.
Oh, thank you.
That's what we've gotten so far. Let's just give it a couple more minutes, see if anybody else has any more questions. I don't see any.
All right.
So, Claire, I want to appreciate you so much for doing this webinar for us today and being willing to answer more and more questions as they come in.
No.
So I would tell everybody that you can send questions to me at smays@mmll.org, or you can send them directly to Claire, and I'm sure your information is on one of these slides, and we'll get it posted.
Okay.
Oh, there it is. mbielac@michigan.gov is Claire's email. Great. Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you especially to Claire for presenting today.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.